We just need to run the program and make sure we didn't break anything. Okay, so we broke something. Yay. What's up everybody, it's Izzo. Welcome to the lab and welcome to Devlog 14. We're actually taking a break from the Expulsion of Lag series and also from Codename All Night, and we're focusing on a project I'm doing in C++ called Platform X, or Platform Exercise. Basically a project to help me get comfortable with applying C++ to game design. Funny story, this was actually supposed to be a series for Instagram, like prep work for actual devlogs, basically just a bunch of short videos. Then I ran into some errors, something that looks like this. Yeah, so I got stuck trying to make the map generate multiple times, but now that we're here, instead of doing a series of short videos, it's time to really dive into what happened here. So, welcome everyone to the first ever C++ devlog. Our mission today is simple. We're making a random map generator for our little guy to traverse. So let's just start by testing this thing. It's been a while since I've worked on this guy. Okay, well, that's not supposed to happen. I'm sure we'll get to fixing it throughout the video. Hopefully. So, let's move on. Okay, so now to start. This is actually where I left off at, so there's some properties and functions that need to be removed to really give us a blank slate to work with. The main change was changing the value this inner for loop uses to control its execution. Instead of the property pre-index being used, we're using max map size, and specifically we're using its x member. This should allow the entire map to be generated instead of just 4 rows. So let's go ahead and test this real quick. Alright, we're looking good so far, no errors, and I changed something. Alright, look at me. Okay, so I'm thinking the ground starts too high, so let's make it a little shorter. All we gotta do is change the value h is initialized to. It's basically a y-axis offset. Let's go ahead and test this too. Yeah, not exactly what we're looking for, and I figured out the problem off screen. I forgot to press the record button, but basically I only updated that initialized value, that 9, in one place, and it had to be updated in 2 places to make sure everything was properly positioned. Anyways, moving on. Alright, so now that we're all caught up and cleaned up, let's work on this mess here. These lines are used for creating a tile and pushing it into the tile map container. This line here is really ugly and kind of hard to understand, plus there's a lot going on in this loop. Let's make the creation and addition of the tile its own function. All we're gonna do is tear out this little piece of code here and then paste it into the function definition of add tile. Boom, now we're ready to use the function and we have a place to use it at as well. I get rid of the one line by breaking it into 3 lines that are responsible for the math of the coordinates, and finally the call to add tile, which just looks so simple. It just has 2 arguments being put into it, just soothing to look at really. Alright, let's test this. It should do what we've seen before, generate a full ground plane. Success, we got it. Alright, it's time to make the entire for loop used for map generation into its own reusable function. First off, some more cleanup. I'm replacing some properties with new ones with better names for their purposes. Later on, I did run into some errors for the properties. It was these old functions I was experimenting with. I just deleted them and kept it pushing. Now on to implementing the generate chunk function. Here I am, borrowing terms from Minecraft. We're on our way, guys. Side note, no idea why I started to define the function with arguments as if they weren't already members, but I took those out later on, so yeah. I started copying the for loop and converting its values to the new properties. Then I got stuck. Something about the way I was declaring the values just didn't feel right. After some thinking, it was the way I defined the control variables. They could be initialized in the for loop. The new properties were really only used for loop control, position calculations, and initializing these local index values. From there it got simple again. Just some copy and pasting, then variable swapping, and boom. We're ready to implement this puppy to our generate map function. And for the customary test. This should generate about 15 tiles because of what we initialized that index value to, and because there's no continuous calling of this function. So there is a problem. The screen was unresponsive and we have error codes, and nope, I don't know what they mean either. But I did find the problem. It's in our inner for loop. I checked the start x against the end x. It's supposed to be the x index I'm checking against the index. So I swapped that, gave it another spin, And this time, success. Our 15 tiles are here. With generating chunks being fully implemented and tested, it was time for the next logical move. Throw it in a while loop to see if it can work repeatedly. And on the first test try, no, it did not work repeatedly. Here's the thing. The loop should have ran 4 times, instead it only ran twice. The problem was with the X properties not being updated correctly. By the second iteration, it's adding 30 instead of 15, which would give our loop check the wrong value. I added a new property called chunk size that basically specifies how many tiles horizontally should be generated per generate chunk call. With that, our first version of generate chunk was done. Right now, it's no different from the original, but already we're seeing more freedom in the way the map generates without having to code anything extra. By changing that chunk size, we can actually specify the number of rows that are generated per call, which will help when we have y-axis randomization put in. So I'll see you guys in just a second. First problem we'll address is the problem with the chunks lining up. I started trying to fix the problem before this point, but kinda gave up because it wasn't something affecting the program at that moment. So I did what any logical person would do. I took the equation and pasted it into the generate chunk function, and then subtracted it from the entire y position calculation, then fired it up for a spin. The result was this. Some sort of inverted effect where the hill is on the bottom of the screen, not the top. Clearly not the effect we're going for here. After some math, I realized the equation I used for the tiles was giving me the full position, not the amount of pixels that needed to be applied to the equation. All I had to do was take out the first part of the equation and then add it to the entire y position calculation, and then that fixed the problem. That was great. One problem scratched off the list. Next was changing the jump strength or jump velocity as is defined in the player class. In my head, 300 was enough for a 2-tile jump. And it was. Now I'm thinking about some sort of double jump effect for our little square, maybe for a later lab session. Anyways, problem 2, checked off the list. Last problem was with the transition from one chunk to another. It only allows for a 2-tile difference in the chunks. All that's needed is a third case that sets delta y to start y, which is the piece we're missing for that smooth transition. Along the way, I kinda forgot how to use the else if construct. Please don't judge me, I'm in the middle of like 3 languages right now. Anyways, time for a test. We got it. Random y offsets in varied chunk forms. This is the start to a random map generator. Well, tile generator that is. So we got the start to a good map generator. So now, just like any good programmer would do, it's time to break things. I mean, test to see how far we can take this. All I'm gonna do is start playing with the properties of the map. The theory is that we should be able to further customize the look of the map by doing this. It looks like the first modification to the max map size on the x-axis works. Time to keep going. Let's try changing the chunk size. Okay, no idea what happened here. After the first chunk, it seems like the delta y just stopped being modified. After some thought, it's the start x and end x properties, specifically the end x property. It needs to be initialized to the chunk size for things to work right. With that, the generator worked again. But now, for the last problem. This map isn't random, it's a pattern. The problem was with the check. No matter what, it will sequence 0, 1, 2, never switching that up. So time to introduce a new value. It's going to be local to the generate chunk function. This value will be set to the chunk number plus a random number. I'm using 3 at first, and the second argument is controlling the offset. By default, it's 3 for our map generator to ensure that we don't get tiles all the way up to the top of the screen. But for this, we want it to be at 1. So let's try this out. Still no difference. Okay, maybe our mod value is too low to give us good results. Let's try 100. Okay, still no difference. Well, I got desperate and just tried some random stuff. I used the chunk number as the mod value, and wow, it actually worked. Okay, to break it down, it works because chunk number on every iteration is changed, so therefore it's a different mod value being plugged into our random number generator every time, which does force a different random number to be generated. Alright, looks like we got it this time around. Okay, so to start, we're using a bool called generated to hold the status of a generated map. A bool is a data type that can only be true or false. A side note with the way I name variables, I prefix member variables with an M so I know what's going on. So when a map is generated, it'll be true. Therefore, we'll throw in setting it to true within the maps function called generate map. When a map is not generated, it'll be false. there are a couple places we have to set generated to false at. First is right here in the constructor, basically the function that creates an object from these class files we're working in. Since there's no map at the start, we need to make sure our bool reflects that. Second, we need to set it to false in this purge map function, which we'll revisit later. It's time to put that generated bool to work. First, we need something called a getter. Basically, it's a function that will give access to a private member. Since generated is a private bool, we're gonna need that. With that out the way, on to the game state file. Using an if statement, we're gonna call that brand spanking new getter, basically asking the map class, do you have a generated map? For the actions we want to be taken, we're gonna take everything in this function and stuff it in the brackets. Now, for the final step before we test, we need to have the game state make the map generate if the generated bool is false. This else statement and the call to map setup should do the trick. Alright, it's time for our first test, everyone. We just need to run the program and make sure we didn't break anything. Okay, so we broke something. Yay. Well, this problem is easy to fix and also my fault. Whoops. I checked the wrong property in the if statement. It's supposed to be checking the generated property, not if the game map pointer is pointing to something. Okay, lab test 1, take 2. Okay, we're good. A bunch of red squares and a moving green square. Alright, let's move on. Alright, now that we got that under control, we have to repeat the same thing for another possible state of the map, if there's a map generating already. It's pretty much the same thing, so let's just cut to the part where I struggled with how to check the new in progress bool and the generated bool. Yep, I got stuck for a minute, made a mistake or two, but in the end, we got it. For the first check, aka the first if statement, we need generated to be true and we need in progress to be false. Then for the map generation to be triggered, both bools have to be false. And for the final and newest addition, we have to check if in progress is true. If it is, basically do nothing but wait for the map to generate. And we're gonna spit out this lovely message to the console. Now, on to the test. We pretty much just complicated things a bunch and I don't even know if I set this up correctly. So let the testing begin. We're just loading the map in and looking for this little message from the console to let us know that all 3 states are being caught. Ah, there it is. Awesome, and we got the full map still. We're looking good. Okay, now it's time to go and mess up the Entity Manager class. I mean, modify it a bit. The Entity Manager class is really just used to hold entities and it also handles their collisions and stuff like that. What we need to do is just create a way to grab the number of entities inside the Entity Manager. We're just going to get another getter going for that. What we're trying to do is return an int called ID counter. It's modified when an entity is added to the game. Now it's time for the MVP of this whole thing, the clear map function. Alright, that's it. All it does is turn on a new bool called reset map. We got another bool called reset active. The former is really like a command bool. When true, something will happen. Meanwhile, the reset active bool is really for conveying information on the generation in progress. Now, back to the update function. Time to put these bools to work and clear the map. First up, we're checking that reset active for being false. And when it is, well, all the logic happens. Put simply, resetting a map will be the primary check for everything. Now, in the else statement, basically what happens when that reset active is true. Step 1, we clear all the entities using a method in the Entity Manager class called purgeMap. Then we call a similar function on the map called purgeMap. It will clear all the individual tiles in the map. Lastly, we need to modify those bools we created. We set reset active to true and we set reset map to false. Alright, so some last minute changes before we can actually test this. First, we have to expand the first if statement to include a check for reset active. Both have to be false for gameplay to execute. For the else statement, we have to turn it into an else if statement. And we have to check if reset map is true for the actual clearing of everything to start. And for the final else if statement, we're checking if reset active is true. If it is, we're going to get the tile count and the entity count from the map and the entity manager respectively. When they equal 0, meaning everything has been cleared, then we set reset active to false. Ideally, that means that the entire cycle should start again and a new map should be generated. Ideally. Now usually, it would be time for a test where we don't know the results, but this is where we catch up with the errors and the current roadblock. Basically, clearing and generating a new map is not working. On camera, there were 3 different tests I did to try to fix the problem. The first introduced problems with input. I couldn't move the player during the test. The second test, the map didn't generate. The third test, nothing came back. No map and no player. Not to worry, there is hope. which I will talk about next time, so stay tuned everyone. Thanks for joining me today in the lab. Leave a like if you enjoyed today's lab project, let me know what you think in the comments, and subscribe to join me in the lab for more experiments. Alright guys, have a good one, see you for the next one.